Chad wants you to witness this badass base jump! Get ready for it!
I would advise you to use a parachute.
What? Parachutes are like the diapers of the sky, man. They're for babies. Don't you want to live on the edge? On the edge of danger? Head over there and watch the righteousness! Just let me know when you're ready for this, brah. Woo! I live to taste the danger! Righteous. Extreme hemorrhaging.
Back on your feet, friend.
Woo! Hell to the hell, yeah! Oh, my hemorrhaging viscera, that was freaking rad!
Borderlands 3 is a pretty fun game. By now, if you're waiting to buy it for whatever reason, you've probably heard about it being a pretty good game, and you're probably excited by it being regarded as a pretty good game. Hello again, I am Blunty, and aside from being a pretty good game, one that has, at least for the moment, been spared the vile vampiric cancer of live service microtransaction douchebaggery that is all too common these days and has ruined many recent games, in my opinion, it is also a bit of an odd duck when it comes to performance. I mean, outside of the bugs, which it has, several of which have already meant quests don't progress or trigger correctly for me and have required some hoop jumping so I can actually move through the game, and aside from the seriously stupid and terrible UI and UX design decisions, which have been frustrating in making stuff harder and more confusing than it needed to be, especially if you are a player new to the Borderlands series like I am. And of course, the second-class first-person shooter platform, console players are seeing big issues with frame rates and lag and optimization issues. But on the true home of the first-person shooter, the PC, we're seeing lots of optimization issues too. For me, this has mostly been about an occasional but massive lag spike. Sometimes even basically freezing up the game screen for a few seconds at a time, often of course in one of the endless, very intensive shootouts. A little bit frustrating. Hasn't managed to kill me yet. But also, when I went to test some basic comparative performance numbers with an eye to just doing a simple side-by-side GPU comparison video for some more common GPU power levels, I found the two highest graphic options, Ultra and Badass. Ooh, so edgy. The top graphics option is called Badass. Extreme! And as far as I can tell, these two options are identical, except for perhaps slightly thicker volumetric fog, and the frame rate performance delivered are basically identical anyway. I don't know why Badass and Ultra are two different settings when it doesn't seem like it makes a practical difference. But aside from that, I'm sure the performance issues will be gradually ironed out somewhat with patches and such. But yeah, for now, not a perfect game, but a pretty good game. I did most of my testing at 1440p, which is my, and I think quite a lot of PC gamers, current target for AAA gaming. Noticeably crisper than 1080p, but not as brutal or expensive to run at shiny high and ultra settings as 4K is. But later in this video, I do test 4K and even some super low-end stuff, so stay tuned for that. My test system was a nicely cozy budget sweet spot for the average PC gamer enthusiast, the Ryzen 5 2600. Although if you're building now, obviously go for the 3000 range, they are awesome. And being, in case you missed it, an AMD optimized game, there's a big old AMD logo when you boot up the game, the first thing I did was compare their 1440p sweet spot beastie, the RTX 5700, up against Nvidia's similarly slotted 1440p monster, the RTX 2060.
I will never understand what compelled that man.
Here, by the way, I've gone ahead and slowed down the benchmark with a side-by-side of the three most common and useful graphics defaults, so you can hopefully get a better idea of what the differences are. The 5700 in 1440p Badass mode, the completely maxed out graphics option, it came home with a nicely playable but not quite ideal 45 FPS. Nvidia's 2060 comes close enough that it makes no practical difference to gameplay, but they do come in second, just for the record, if you're one of those people who like to argue about such things. It scrapes the bum of 42 FPS. Now, as I mentioned before, the performance stuff is weird because stepping down one graphics setting to the lesser Ultra settings, not the Badass, the Ultra settings, gets 40 FPS on average on the 5700. That's a lower graphics setting, but worse performance. Nice work, Gearbox. Top-notch coding right there. What's happening? For a 1440p 60 FPS experience on the 5700, you'll be wanting the high settings, which while playing is virtually pretty damn close to the badass settings anyway. There's some subtle difference in the volumetric and shadows and stuff, but nothing you'll really notice in any intrusive way unless you look for it while you're, enjoying this pretty good game. Over on the 2060, the gap widens here. In 1440p high settings, we see just above 52 FPS. Doesn't quite get to the 60. And if you want some padding to make sure you're solid locked past 1440p 60 FPS on your FreeSync and or G-Sync screen for the best tear-free clarity, medium setting will get you past 80 FPS on the 5700. And the RTX 2060 pulls up second again with a still entirely practical, if you're using G-Sync, 76 FPS. But rolling back down to 1080p for those who prefer it or are still waiting to upgrade their screen, even the top-end badass setting will get you past 60 FPS on AMD's 5700, while on the 2060 you'll scrape just underneath it. For a dollop of context, I also tested an RX 590 I had here. The noticeably cheaper AMD option and a step down asks for medium settings to get to a 60 FPS experience at 1440p, still pretty acceptable in my humble opinion, and the same at 1080 will get you to 80 FPS. Unfortunately, I don't actually have the Nvidia equivalent card, the RTX 1660 here for comparison, but I doubt it's a very different story to what we've already seen so far. Now, the card I personally usually have in this machine while I use it as a secondary gaming rig for streaming is the ever-trusty GTX 1080. I have been playing at 1440p high settings, which benchmarks to 60 FPS. And then, out of curiosity more than any thought of practicality, I tested it on the itty-bitty $450 rig I had built to test the Ryzen 5 3400G APU with its onboard RX Vega 11 GPU. As I showed in the original build and review video, this little $140 CPU-GPU combo managed to punch well above its weight class, even on AAA games from a few years back. But here, in 2019's Borderlands 3, the humble low settings at 1080p, well actually, 30 FPS. Now, the game looks kinda bad at 720p, let's admit, but out of interest, I tested it, and you'll see just below 40 FPS on the 3400G here. Once again, I've managed to underestimate AMD's idiotically punchy Ryzen APUs. One day I'll learn that these things are nonsensically powerful for what they are and what they cost. Finally though, on my big rig, my Threadripper 1950X toting an RTX 2080 monster, I churned it up to 4K to see what's what, and, well, I wonder if this is one of those optimization issues, because frankly, I did expect better than barely 40 FPS under the maxed out badass settings here. Even 2 steps down to the high settings at 4K can't get me to 60 FPS. And frankly, there's little point to turning it down even more to see where 60 FPS lies, because when you're playing at 4K, if you have to step down below high settings to get to 60 FPS, it's kind of pointless. There's no point having extra resolution if you don't have extra detail to show with that resolution. And for most people in-game, 1440p will be quite crispy enough. I mean, it's not like you can't see the difference. You can. I can. But I'd rather nail 60 FPS down, especially for a first-person shooter, than I would have slightly nicer fog or slightly better shadows. So there. Hopefully this gives you some useful reference on performance across several common levels of GPU hardware for Borderlands 3. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. Now I'm going to spend the entire rest of my day playing Borderlands 3 instead of getting work done. So if my next video sucks, you can blame this game. Make sure you're subscribed and bell-ended and whatnot to find out if this game ruins my next video. You're curious, aren't you? Do it. Do it, do it, do it.
Wicked jump! Parkour! A ring ring, brah! Ring ring! It's for you! Ring ring!
I am answering this fictional call.
Wow! Good answer, brah!